Okay, so we're recording on Zoom as well as Facebook Live. Welcome, everybody. This is the National Building Expert Ask the Building Expert webinar series. And just to give you a brief background of why we decided to put this whole webinar series together, basically it's to help property managers, building owners, condo associations, contractors, real estate developers, and anybody who's interested in building, construction, and real estate. So once again, the topic is Building Expert Discusses the Florida Building Collapse. It's actually presented by Construction Management Inspection and National Building Expert. And we have a special Ask Building Expert series. They're all related, all these companies. So let's get right into it. You may be asking, and there's numerous questions and rumors that have been going on around since the Florida building collapse. But the big question is, what happened and should we worry? Now, I'm going to get into details about what happened and what I think, basically my opinion on what happened. And should we worry? Yes, we should worry, because this kind of thing should never have happened. My opinion, and this is a professional opinion, the tragic event was totally avoidable and should never have happened. So that's why we should worry, because this kind of thing should not have happened at all. Now, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. There was no bomb explosion, there was no earthquake, and it was too little too late. If you see the photo of the building, that's actually the Champlain, Florida building before the collapse. And that's one angle taken. Right now, the property, as you know, is only land, because the building collapsed, part of it, and the rest of the building got taken down because it was unsafe. Now let's talk about the city building inspection program flaws. Now this is a city in Florida, but there's other cities where the tower, the tower was not in that specific city, but other cities in Florida adopted the same building inspection program. And when I say flaws, there's not a flaw basically in the inspection program per se. The flaw that I'm talking about is the time period or the duration of having a building inspected. Now in Florida, there's what's called a 40-year building safety inspection program. And the reason it's called 40 years is because when the building is first built, every year after that, there's no inspection until 40 years later. So the building has to be 40 years old before the first inspection is completed. And this is called a recertification program. And the inherent flaw, in my opinion, in the program is that, why do you wait 40 years? You should have the inspection done of these buildings after 10 years or 20 years even. That's my opinion. So the program is a good program, but it's just that they're taking too long to inspect buildings, and that's part of the problem. Now, specifically, the 40-year recertification, there's two main inspection programs. There's a structural and there's an electrical inspection. There's two separate inspections. Now, the structural inspection, the actual report is about 9 pages long, and it covers structural components, columns, beams, anything structural, as well as roofing and some electrical. And the electrical inspection report is about 5 pages long, and it covers electrical distribution and some other electrical components and all that. These are very good inspection programs. The flaw is that it takes too long to get this thing done. Why wait 40 years? The reason I'm saying this is that building components fail in a less of a time period than 40 years. And let's talk about that. Major building components useful life. Well, I went to Mexico and I visited the pyramid, and this is a great pyramid. How old do you think this pyramid is? Okay, in the Mayan industry of buildings, they started about 3,000 years ago, and this pyramid is probably 1,500 years old. And I saw it for myself, and I inspected it, and of course there's no electrical and plumbing, and I didn't see any spalling, but I did see worn stones and some cracks. But the reason there's no major spalling is that these components are basically pieces of large stones that were cut. There's no rebar that could get rusted or anything like that. That's the reason why these buildings are standing so long. And of course, there's no maintenance. It gets weathered, but that's the situation. Now, let's talk about a high-rise building, a high-rise condo building or apartment building. The useful life, less than 40 years. Well, what are we talking about here? It could be a concrete wall. It could be a ceiling of a parking deck or the top of a parking deck. If the top of the parking deck is so worn, where the waterproofing is worn, guess what? Water is going to penetrate the concrete, hit the reinforcing steel, and now you got corrosion and water, and bad things happen to the concrete. The concrete by itself doesn't last forever. It doesn't. So it's a porous material that's not waterproof. So that's the problem. The other problem is there's other components that is going to last less than 40 years. And let's go right into that now. What kind of components have a useful life less than 40 years? And when I say useful life, I'm talking about a useful service life, and the component doesn't function as intended, or it doesn't function as when it was brand new. Because over time, there's wear and tear, there's maybe vandalism, there's weathering, there's exposure to the elements, and all these kind of good things. So going down the list, and these are not every single component in a building, but these are major components that are major cost, large ticket items. We're talking about an elevator. The useful life is 35 to 40 years. Some last longer. Electrical system, 35 to 40 years. Roofing, 10 to 20 years. Painting, 10 to 15 years. Waterproofing, 5 to 10 years. Now, these are just rule of thumb useful life years. Let me talk about painting as an example. If your building is located in an area where there's a lot of sun, or in a marine environment, let's say you're located on oceanfront property, okay, such as the building that collapsed, or if your building is in Waikiki or in Kona on the coast, the painting is not going to last 10 to 15 years. The painting is going to last probably 8 to 10 years. So the climate, environment, and all those things have an effect on painting. So the rule of thumb, 10 to 15 years, that's a best case scenario. If you get a lot of rain, a lot of sun, a lot of salt air, of course, a painting is not going to last. Or, for instance, waterproofing. You have waterproofing on your parking deck, and you have a lot of traffic, cars going back and forth. your waterproofing isn't going to last as long as an area where there's no high traffic. Okay, so the useful life of these components less than 40 years, which is a no-brainer. If these major cost ticket item components are going to last less than 40 years, why are you having recertification of your building at the 40-year mark? You should have it at the 10-year mark or 20-year mark. Okay, so that's the point I'm trying to make. Let's talk about causes of collapse that were speculated regarding this Florida building. Was it a soil problem? Was it a sea level rise issue? Was it a marine environment? The answer is yes, it could be, but I don't think that's the entirety or the number one primary trigger of the collapse. Now, if there was a soil problem like sinking, such as the Millennium Tower in San Francisco, which is sinking to one side and is going to be undergoing repair, that could be a factor. But normally, if you have a major soil problem, the whole building would not collapse. The building would be sinking in various degrees, not a total collapse. Sea level rise could be a problem where you have water rising up in the soil. The groundwater is not clear water now, it's salt water. And salt water is highly corrosive. And when the salt has chlorides in it, attacks the reinforcing steel, now you have major degradation of your structural components. Marine environment is if you're close to the ocean, you have a lot of wind, humidity, salt spraying against the building. Any kind of metal or paint or waterproofing is not going to last that long. Okay, so I don't think the major cause of the Florida building collapse was due to a soil problem, sea level rise, or a marine environment, except these could be contributing factors. Other causes of collapse that were speculated would be faulty design and improper construction. Now, faulty design is if the architect and engineers that first designed the building made an error or mistake. And in construction, they followed the error, and that was a contribution to some kind of failure. That would be faulty design. If the design was not faulty and the contractor doing the construction did not follow the plans and specifications as stated and missed something, then that would be improper construction. Improper construction could also be if the plan showed 4 pieces of rebar, and this is just a simple example, and it's not true. I'm just saying 4 pieces of rebar in a beam. Of course, a beam has way more than 4, but just for discussion's sake, 4 pieces of rebar that were put in to construct the beam, but in actuality, the plan showed 8 pieces of rebar. Well, that would be improper construction unless the design called for only 4. Okay. Also, the concrete mix. If they put too much water in the concrete, then the mix was not to spec. Okay, so there's actually lawsuits now, and they're talking about suing the original architect and engineers and the contractor and developer and everybody down the line. This is my opinion. The primary cause of the collapse of the Florida building was due to failure of structural components due to concrete spalling. And as I mentioned before, when the rebar gets moisture and salt, it starts corroding the rebar. What happens is the concrete surrounding the rebar cracks, and that's spalling. And guess what? When the rebar is affected and corrodes, is it basically as intended when it was brand new? No. Now, when the concrete starts cracking off, is that a good situation? No, because the building, when it was first built, was not in that condition. So if you're a property manager or a condo owner, and you're building, even apartment building, office building, this information applies to any kind of concrete structure or structural building, regardless of whether it's a shopping center, hospital, a school, apartment building, a hotel. It's all the same. You have reinforced concrete and you have concrete spalling conditions. Okay, so I just want to make that clear that it doesn't happen only on a condo building. Any kind of building made of reinforced concrete is exposed to this problem. Okay, so primary cause of collapse is failure of structural components due to concrete spalling. Now, I'm going to show you photos. If you look at the image on the right, okay, you see on the left, there's groundwater flow. And what happens is you could have seawater from the ground migrating up through the concrete slab that's on the slab on grade. And you see the cracking and the blue areas. That's water. So water is actually penetrating through the concrete, attacking the reinforcing steel, causing spalling. So if this was a situation on your slab on grade in a parking deck, this is a condition that could cause failure. So there was a structural survey of the building in 2018, and the engineer found areas where there's cracks in the parking ramp of the parking deck, cracks in columns, beams, walls, water damage in concrete slab above the parking level. There was some issues with the pool. So in 2018, it was already a bad situation. And it was probably even before then, because in 2018, when the structural engineer did the survey and he noted these things, it didn't happen overnight. So these conditions have been going on for some time. Now, the survey that the engineer did was enough information, I think, to cause alarm. And in my opinion, the city of Surfside, Florida should have actually gone in and issued a violation notice and a notice to correct like immediately. So as I was talking to you about the consultant that did the inspection, the image on the left is of photos that the engineer took of the parking. And I want to make it clear that I have not been to this building before the collapse. I haven't been to the property after. But judging by the photos that I see, this is already a bad situation to cause a red flag and not say, oh, well, here's your report. I think, there's work that needs to be done. I think they should have actually said, hey, wait a minute, we have a major problem here. We got to go to plan B. There's no time to be worrying about how much this is going to cost. This is a life safety matter. We need to get in there, get a contractor in there and start shoring the area and fixing things. So over time, of course, new cracks, repairs. I think they inspected repairs and it wasn't so good. So there was major structural damage, failed waterproofing around the swimming pool. There was one report or maybe two that they were going to do the repair around the pool area, but then they said, oh, it's so bad, we can't even go in there. I mean, that's in itself a bad situation. Some more photos here. building collapse in stages. As you know, you probably saw the video, the first video of one section, the middle section of the tower collapsing. And then right after that, the building section on the right also collapsed. So in my opinion, this total collapse wasn't due to just some, water on the ground. Okay, the 40-year safety recertification, and I said I don't agree with the 40 years. I think it should be more like 10 years. So it's kind of a wake-up call for people in the industry, whether it's real estate developers or building inspectors, condo associations, apartment building associations. Everybody should be getting on the bandwagon saying, hey, we don't want this situation to happen anywhere else. So why don't we go ahead, and it's going to become political to change the 40-year to maybe a 20-year or 10-year recertification. And the recertification or this inspection, it's not all over the country. It's just in this area. For instance, in Hawaii, there's no 40-year recertification or 40-year inspection. There's no inspection. There's no even 10-year or 5-year safety inspection. Once a building is built in Hawaii, there's no obligation, no requirement, no law that requires a building inspector from the local jurisdiction to go to the building and do the inspection. So do you see the problem here? The problem here is that it's a honor system where the building department is saying, well, everybody's on their own and we expect them to look at their building, and if there's a problem, we expect them to fix it. It's kind of like, self-monitoring. Well, as you can see, that doesn't work here, okay? So if you look at the image on the right, it's an example of spalling. There's a crack where water gets in, it hits the rebar starts corroding. And when the rebar corrodes, it actually expands, it gets bigger. What happens when the rebar is embedded in concrete, solid concrete, and the metal steel starts expanding? It has to go somewhere, right? So it ends up cracking the concrete. And when the concrete breaks away, or there's a big enough crack where more water can get in or moisture, that's a spalling condition. So a spalling condition is not something like paint peeling off or flaking off or blistering of a building. This is something major. So my talk is that if you have a concrete building and you see cracks that are spalling cracks, you need to fix it right away. It's not like, well, it's not that big, because I can tell you, based on my experience, if you see a 12-inch crack due to spalling, that crack actually could be a 4-foot crack that goes in 4 feet. And instead of costing $200 to fix, it now costs $20,000 if it's a lanai or balcony of a building, or a parking deck where the failure is such that from the top deck, the spall goes all the way through. So when you do the fix, you start jackhammering the top. Now you can actually see the basement because there's a big hole there. And I'll give you a good example. The image on the left is the ceiling of a parking deck. And you see all those lines there? Those lines, that's actually pieces of rebar that corroded. So what happened is the top of the deck had failed waterproofing. No one fixed it for years and years. And the water kept getting worse and worse. It hit the rebar got corroded. Now pieces of concrete started flaking off. And when I'm saying pieces of concrete, it may be 3 pounds, it may be a 5-pound piece of concrete. And if that falls on a car or someone's head, that's not going to be a nice situation. Now, remember I told you about the parking deck where you're doing the fix, you jackhammer the top, and all of a sudden it goes right through. That's called a full depth repair, a full depth spalling repair. A partial depth is if it doesn't go all the way through. Now, this photo here is of a building that I worked on in Waikiki. It's a hotel, and this was a walkway. So can you imagine how bad the spalling was in this walkway? The repair, once they jackhammered, the whole walkway had to be taken out. Can you imagine if somebody was walking on the walkway and the thing collapsed and the person fell, 2 or 3 stories? That's not a good situation. So spalling is a major problem. Don't let anybody tell you that it's not. If somebody does, have them call me and I'll talk story with them. Now let's talk about some legal issues, and you may be concerned. Now, recently I found out in the Florida building that the insurance company tendered their maximum coverage. What was the maximum coverage? It was about 48 to 50 million dollars. And you might say, wow, that's a lot of money. Okay, but the problem is that the estimates from attorneys on settlement of the case is up to $1 billion. So the 50 million is not gonna really solve the problem. Okay, now in court recently, the judge took into consideration $50 million of insurance and added on 100 million for settlement. And where are you getting the 100 million? Well, he's saying that's the value of the land. So you take the value of the land, if it's sold, and you add it to the 50 million, now you have 150 million. But 150 million is not enough to settle the case when the estimates to settle are $1 billion. So therein lies the problem. Okay, now, numerous lawsuits against multiple parties. What are the lawsuits? Well, there was a lawsuit not even within 24 hours, there was a first lawsuit. And when there's a lawsuit, legal issues regarding a building collapse, guess what? The attorneys sue everybody. Who do they sue? Well, who do you think is guilty, or who do you think may be guilty? They would sue the condo board, the condo association, the developer, original developer. They would sue the local building department. They would sue the original architect, original engineers. They would sue anybody who had anything to do with the building. They would name the engineer who was a consultant that did the initial inspections. So everybody down the line, and then let them come to court and say, here's the reason why I'm not guilty. Okay, and that's how it works. Now, there's a situation where there's what's called a class action lawsuit. So if you have one owner or a family of an owner that sues, that's one single lawsuit. But if you have 2 or more people that join in and the court certify it as a class action lawsuit, then it becomes a class action lawsuit and a bigger deal, because now instead of one person, you may have 50 or 100 different people. Okay, so that's what the courts want to see. They don't want to deal with 100 different lawsuits. They want to only deal with one. So that's the motivation. Now, let's talk about forensic engineering protocol. So what happens is after the search and rescue operation, search and recover, then they need governmental approval. And when I say they, all these engineers that are involved in gathering evidence, okay? And what is the evidence? The evidence is needed to determine the cause of the collapse. And there's physical evidence that's gathered. The building materials are going to be tested. And we're talking about gathering concrete samples, reinforcing steel samples. And what do? They take it to a laboratory. And if I was running the show, I would say, here's the numerous tests that I want you to do on these concrete samples. Here's the numerous tests I want you to do on the reinforcing steel. I want measurements done. I want cross-section photos, measurements. I want to know what the degradation factor is, what percentage. So you take the steel and you compare it with a brand new steel and you see how much is corroded away. Concrete, we need to see what the water content is, what the chloride content is, what kind of materials are in the concrete. Sand, how much actual cement, what the aggregate is. Aggregate is all those little stones, small rocks that go into the concrete mix to make concrete. So that's going to take 1 or 2 years, all these testing and all that. And there's going to be mock-ups of the building. And I mean, it's going to be really technical. And the report is going to be thousands of pages long. Okay, so basically, that's the protocol of evidence gathering. Let me show you some other photos. Okay, these 3 photos were taken last year. Okay, and why were they taken? It was taken by somebody that was interested in buying a unit in the building. And some of these photos are actually screenshots of a video that was taken. So can you imagine a condo owner or a condo buyer, prospective buyer, going to the condo building, and I'm interested in buying a unit in the building, so I want to go and look at the building and look at the unit that's on the market. So as a person is going through the building, they're taking a video, and the video screenshots are very disturbing. Why? Because if you look at the screenshot of the video, I can see paint peeling away. I can see corroded concrete at the walkways and balconies. And it's not a pleasant sight. So it's not like, oh, all of a sudden the building just collapsed. No, if I look at these, I'm going, no wonder the building collapsed. They got some major spalling issues here. If you look at the photo on the bottom, this is if you see cracks on the underside of the balcony, and the leading edge is actually the edge of the balcony where your railing is. It's the edge. If you see cracks on the underside or underneath, that's already a major spalling conditions because water had penetrated probably through the railing or collecting on the top of that edge and going through. And as you can see, the building is painted, right? But let me ask you, is the paint actually doing anything? Is it protecting the building? No, it's probably helping to collect and hold the water. So if you didn't have cracks in there, the paint is probably holding the water in the concrete. And that's not a good situation. So these are actual photos taken of the scene. As you can see, each piece of concrete is marked with a number, and they take it to another site and they lay it out, and they're kind of taking pictures, doing an inventory, and they're kind of going to attempt to kind of put it together or construct it in some way using 3D modeling and things like that to come up with, well, where was the actual location of the failure? What happened here and all that. So there's a whole bunch of engineers, specialists from all over the United States that are involved in this, and some from even the world that specialize in building failures that are going to be involved. Now, here's another speculation. Was the original architect and engineer at fault? So part of the evidence gathering is they're going to look at the original plans and specifications, and they're going to compare it to the actual building that was built to see if there was any errors or omissions in the plans or any kind of problem. And they're going to do that with the actual construction also by reviewing the components. So they're going to be doing all these studies and everything. Safety recommendations for any kind of building is make sure you have an inspection program. If you don't, set up one. If you need help, consult a specialist, a building engineer, structure engineer. If your property manager has something like that, say, can I get a sample of another building that you manage to see what your inspection program is like? Every building is different. Every building is designed differently. So you may have different components that need to be inspected, but the major items in a high-rise building is the same. Elevator, roof. Every building has a roof. Every high-rise building has an elevator. Every building has walkways where there's railings. Some may not. They have an interior hallway, but make sure you list down all the components. If you're in a condo building, there's a reserve study too, but make sure in concert with the inspection program, you have a repair and maintenance program. So you'd only have the inspection done and you have a report, and the report gets filed away. Take that report, look at your repair and maintenance program. If you don't have one, I suggest you put one together. So if there's anything with concrete cracking, spalling, roof leaking, now it goes to the next tier of repair and maintenance, and get it done right away. Don't kick the can down the road and say, we don't have any money, or I don't think it's that bad, let's wait a while. If you're not sure, call a professional, call an expert. Because if you're the owner of the building, property manager, or you're on a condo board and you don't call in an expert, guess what? In the court of law, you become the expert. They're going to go, okay, Mr. Board member, okay, Mrs. Property Manager, you didn't recommend to get an expert in, so I guess you're the expert. So that's why we're suing you, because you didn't make the proper recommendation. The other thing is a reserve study. Make sure that your building has a reserve study, and it doesn't have to be a condo building. It could be a hotel. It could be an office building. I would suggest putting together a reserve study or hiring a reserve study professional to do the reserve study for you. And you can look at the list of what needs to be repaired or replaced. And it's a good guide. It's a financial tool. Other recommendations: take immediate action to repair. Do not wait. This unfortunate event is a huge wake-up call. Why is it a huge wake-up call? It's because this kind of thing should not have happened. Now, in the world of condominiums, the board of a condo has a fiduciary duty. They have a legal duty to protect the property. And that duty is not marred or affected by lack of money. So in a situation where in this building they didn't have the money, they were about $15 million short. But what do you do in that case? You can't punt. You can't say, well, we don't have the money, so we don't know what to do. I think we'll discuss it. No, there's no time for discussing. The only thing that should be discussed is, what are we going to do to fix the building right away? Okay. And in my opinion, the board took action, but it was too little too late. It was too long. So everybody down the line should have done a better job. The local building jurisdiction should have done a better job. I think the engineer should have done a better job. But it's easy to point fingers. My message here is we don't want this situation to happen again. Now, a total building collapse is rare, or a building collapse of a portion of a tower is very rare. I see collapse of balconies or certain sections of a building, but not entire buildings. So the message is there. Please get your building fixed if you need to. Now, I have a website on the Florida building collapse. It's called floridabuildingcollapse.now.site. I have 2 other interviews that I did with the media, and then there's also a press release that went to over 700 United States and worldwide media network platforms. Exposure was over 100 million viewers. So before I go into the Q&A, and let me go to the next slide here. Okay, I want to thank you guys for tuning in, for listening. To me, this is a very important subject because this is what kind of work I do. That's why when I got word and I seen the videos, I was really kind of upset, because I'm like, why? This should not happen. So in concert with additional webinars that I'm giving, we're doing a fire life safety in high-rise buildings. That's in a couple of weeks. And then next month, I'm doing a webinar on building safety. And building safety, that webinar would consist of not only concrete spalling repair, but I'm talking about slip and fall conditions, trip and fall conditions, windows, fire life safety issues, and anything to do with keeping a building safe. So hopefully you can join us for that. If you want to register on Zoom for any other webinars, or view the on-demand webinars of ones that I've done already, you go to askbuildingexpert.now.site. There's a whole different website that has all the videos of previous webinars I've done, with copies of the PowerPoints and things like that. So once again, thank you for attending. I know you're going to hear more about this issue coming up in the future. And at this time, I'd like to open it up for Q&A. I want to kind of wake up Martin, who's in the back end IT department, tuning in and looking at the chat and the Q&A, and hopefully the Facebook comments. So Martin, are you around?
Yes, sir, Lance, I'm here. You can hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you good.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, this is excellent topic, and I think it's there's a lot to be learned and a lot that can be done. Also, I think that's the big thing. Got to do a lot of stuff, you know. But anyway, I do have a couple of questions, actually about 5, 6 of them that have come in, and the first one is concerning the mandatory recertification program. Can you please elaborate on the items that need to be inspected? Lance, you're muted. Lance, can you hear me? I think you're muted. Or I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Gee, I've been talking to myself.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I was trying to get you back.
I don't know what
Sorry, huh?
happened. You should have waved your hand and said, hey, yeah.
That's why I came on.
Oh, okay. So let me repeat what I said.
Yes, thank you.
So the 40-year recertification is called recertification because from day one, when the building was built, the city building department issued a certificate of occupancy, and that's considered a certification. So 40 years later, they're basically going to the building to recertify and giving their blessing by saying your building is safe, you can continue occupancy. Okay, now in answer to your question, the components of a structural inspection would be structural beams, columns, your parking slab, any kind of concrete spalling, degradation of concrete, corroding rebar, rust stains from rebar, your roof, if there's any leaking of your roof, waterproofing of decks, parking decks especially, that kind of thing. So that's the structural, which is 9 pages. And then the electrical is about 5 pages, which is electrical distribution, any kind of condition that could cause arcing, ground fault protection, and that kind of thing. So the reports are very, very good, the form, inspection form, and I like it. But I just think that the 40-year mark is way, way too long to wait. It should be at the 10-year mark or 20-year mark at least. So that's my opinion. But yeah, good question.
Okay, thanks, Lance. The next question I have, maybe you've answered it, but you can kind of refresh. In your opinion, could the accident have been prevented?
That's a resounding yes, it could have and it should have. And the reason, as I mentioned before, is that there's all these protections that weren't there, such as the building department in that jurisdiction should have paid more attention, should have issued a notice of violation, notice to cure, and sent a citation and saying, you guys fix your building now. I'm giving you, 10 days to do it, and consider it an emergency. Likewise, the engineer that was hired should have said, hey, guys, here's your report, and you need to do something now, instead of saying, here's your report, call me if you have any questions. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened, but after reviewing information about what happened, I'm thinking that things should have been done better. Even the condo board should have said, you know what, we need to get this thing done and just start spending money, instead of saying we have no money, how are we going to raise the 15 million, 16 million dollars? Everyone just waited too long. And that's why I'm saying it could have been prevented. At least if a contractor went in there, knowing that it was an emergency situation, and started shoring up things or closing down the parking deck if it needed to be. I'm all for saying, you know what, this is a bad situation, close the deck down. Sorry, owners, you can't park there anymore because your deck is in bad shape. So it's not like wanting to appease the people or saying, you know what, we don't have money, so we're going to wait and figure out what we're going to do. No, in an emergency situation, you go in there and do it, and then you worry about the money part later. We got any good questions?
Oh yeah,
Any other good questions?
get some good ones here. The next one here that we got was, in Florida, condos must have reserve studies. And I know we did a good webinar on reserve studies earlier. Do you think that a faulty reserve study could have been one of the problems?
If I didn't know the reserve study company and I didn't have information on the reserve study that was done, I would say probably, but in this case, the answer is no, because I know the company that did the reserve study, and I'm personal friends with the company owner. And there's things in the reserve study components that flag concrete spalling, waterproofing issues and all that. So it was not a faulty reserve study. It was slow action on the part of the condo board to do anything and follow the recommendations of the reserve study and the engineer's report. So, but reserve studies are good. Make sure that you just get them done and you follow it. There's a lot of condo associations that have the reserve study done, but they just file it and they don't follow it. So they keep trying to kick the can down the road, which does not work in this situation.
Okay, thanks, Lance. Next question we've got here is there a specific building code with respect to building safety or maintaining a building?
Actually, there is a code or several codes. Now, the first code is the main building code, which is the International Building Code. So when you talk about codes, there's not only one code. So there's an International Building Code. There's also what's called an International Property Maintenance Code. And that could come into play because this is a residential building, or it was. There's an International Residential Code that comes into play, and there's a International Existing Building Code. So there's 4 codes that I mentioned. Now, with respect to concrete repair, there's codes or instructions from major national concrete repair or concrete associations such as ACI, which is American Concrete Institute. And that's probably the main or biggest concrete association. And then there's also ICRI, International Concrete Repair Institute. And that institute regulates or provides information on repairing spalling concrete structures. So you got 2 of those, very good major resources. And by the way, those 2 associations I mentioned are not only used in the reference material used in the United States, it's used worldwide also.
Oh, good to know. Good to know. Thanks, Lance. Get a couple more questions. The next one is, are you at liberty to discuss the lawsuits or provide some information on the current status of the claims? I'm thinking this is about Florida.
Yeah, not really. A lot of information is confidential on the lawsuits, like who's suing who for what amount and all that. But there's a bunch of stuff that's available that's in the public already that were published by newspapers or news media, because whenever a lawsuit is filed, it becomes public record. So if you're interested, I don't know whoever asked the question, but interested in knowing the actual parties of who's suing who and for what, it's available. I don't I choose not to discuss that at this time, but I can tell you that the basis for the lawsuit is partly negligence. And as you can see from the webinar, that there's different components. And of course, when the actual cause is determined, that lawsuit is going to be amended and expanded to maybe add more parties to the lawsuit or blame somebody more. Right now, they don't know if the architect is to blame or the contractor is to blame or who to blame. So it just takes time. It's going to take another year or two to get the information and for this whole legal process to be completed.
Okay, thanks, Lance. It sure does seem like time is a factor in all of this, whether it's the lawsuit or even the timing on doing what needs to get done. Yeah. So I get one more final question here that we received is, in situations where a building falls down, does the building insurance step in and pay for the damages and rebuilding?
In some cases, the insurance wants to defend and say, we're not responsible. And in some cases, they, according to their policy, go in and make partial coverage. But of course, they're going to say, the limits of the policy. And a lot of insurance companies don't want to pay out the full amount. And so they try to see how they cannot be responsible to pay on the claim. But in this case, the insurance company knew that it wasn't a good situation. So I guess their attorneys said, you know what, you might as well just tender the whole full amount of the policy and be done with it, because you're going to get dragged in. It's going to be a huge mess. So it depends on the type of coverage that you have. And I know a lot of insurance policies that I've read have fine print that says, if the owner failed to maintain, then don't blame us. Don't expect us to cover. Or if it's a building code violation, don't expect us to cover. If it's an accident, yeah, we can cover it. But what was the accident due to? Was the accident due to negligence on the part of the building owner? Could the building owner have taken steps to avoid the problem or mitigate, or in other words, could the building owner, or should the building owner have fixed the building? If the building owner fixed the building, would the building have collapsed? So there's all these different things to consider and come into play, but it all depends on the insurance company. And of course, if you're the insurance company, you're going to want to fight the claim because you don't want to pay out. So anyway, that's the answer to that. Do we have any other Q&A on the chat or the Q&A feature or anything on the Facebook comments?
Yeah, well, we've got some good comments on Facebook. That's all the questions that I had. Nothing more in the chat for the Zoom. So I think we're good, but very informative, very eye-opening, even for me. I'm glad I'm not in a condo too.
Okay, well, once again, thank you, Martin, for managing the back end, and thank you for not falling asleep. And thank you out there on Facebook. If you're watching this live, appreciate you attending. Also, thank you to the people on Zoom, the attendees. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email us or give us a call. Once again, the website is askbuildingexpert.now.site. If you're interested in other webinars that we've given already, or you want to be put on the list, well, we don't have a list per se because you have to go in and register on your own. So Zoom can email you your specific proprietary link that you should not share with anybody else. But if you want to attend the webinar, but you cannot because you have to work or you have some other things to take care of, please register anyway, because when you register, we're going to be able to email you the link to the on-demand video. Okay, so thank you for attending. Once again, please sign up if you're interested for the next webinar, which is on fire, life safety in high-rise buildings. Next month, we're giving another webinar on building safety to help the property management, construction, and building industries. So we're going to sign off. Hope to see you at the next webinar. Thank you.
Good job, Lance.
Oh, thank you. You know, what happened is, are you able to stop the recording?
Oh, you need me to stop? I'm sure. I think I can stop recording. There we go.